I'm having a lot of fun, definitely, as a game designer. I do know, like, my job is to deliver something to the player at the end of the day. In education, it's the challenges of life and what you have to learn. But in game development, it's the challenge and the story of what's being put in front of you to play.
On the game design side, is it also a constant treadmill of just learning? Y'all are playing new games, people are always pushing the boundaries.
What is the modern take? What is your take on Fatuis these days?
It's an open world game, it's an RPG. Once you learn Zelda, you can learn other RPGs quite quickly.
What kind of advice would you have for, game designers who want to become game designers? All right, hello everyone. We're back at our Game Makers Lounge with a friend, someone we've worked with at Zynga, definitely sporting the Zynga logo here. So welcome Anna. She is a game designer. I think Anna, we both went to USC as well, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
So we're fellow Trojans as well. We worked at Zynga, started there together around the same time. Really excited to welcome you to our podcast and then talk about game design. So why don't we start by introducing yourself, and would love to dive in and see what you're up to.
Yeah. So I'm Anna. I'm the senior creative director for The Sims 4 at the moment. I love my job.
Fancy.
Yep. My background is game design and development. I started my career actually wanting to make educational content and use technology to help with learning. I'm a very physical learner, so that idea of VR and AR to help with learning modules got me excited about technology. I ended up getting my undergrad in game design development, my master's in ed psych. But that kind of turned into this beautiful career that's a little more operations and game design intertwined in one, and running teams and studios. But yeah, I started in children's games, moved on to Facebook and mobile titles at Zynga for a very long time. Went into some startups and indie development before coming on to EA.
I didn't know that you were involved with making children's games. Do you think that that making children's games prepared you for working with engineers?
Absolutely. Yes, children need things definitely described very specifically, and so do engineers. Cannot mince words.
Be honest, who was it easier to work with, me or CJD?
Oh gosh.
Not to put you on the spot. Say me.
I feel like you both were pretty decent to work with, actually. I don't know if I can compare you both. You guys made
safe answer.
You made work fun. But I do remember, AJ, you driving a car in Hawaii, and I was terrified.
That is true. So that's a fun story. Remember so we can't name the title. One of the titles we were working on got cancelled, and we essentially had to join another studio and had, I think, 10 days off. And so we just decided to hop on a plane and I think it was eight people. We just randomly went to Hawaii and made a weekend out of it. It was fun.
Yeah.
How did AJ get driving duty?
I think he rented like a Suburban and decided to take tight roads by a mountainside. It was terrifying.
Yeah, we were 8 people. Fun times. Anyways, I think, one thing that we're really excited to talk to you about is one of my favorite subjects after engineering, of course, which is game design. Because honestly, it is so difficult. It has so much depth, and not a lot of people really understand it from the outside. And so I would love to start with, your game design philosophy. Let's start at a high level, and would love to kind of dive in deeper as we progress.
Yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of my early education has been in more how people learn and through ed psych. And game design for me is very similar to how people learn new behaviors and concepts and then get motivated to go through those challenges. In education, it's the challenges of life and what you have to learn. But in game development, it's the challenge and the story of what's being put in front of you to play. And everything in my mind is a system. You can architect that system from a game design standpoint with rules and logic. And you're taking this like big experience and designing it for a technology, which is the mode of your vehicle for delivery. It's very similar to designing a curriculum in education, but that mode of delivery is a little bit different. The player in that is the learner, and you're trying to get them to fight the boss, which could be like finishing getting an evaluation for a test, doing, yeah, it's mostly test evaluations in school, graduating, and there's those milestones, and how do you build that? It's very similar to what we do for games, just in a different context. So it goes back to human centered design and learning, in my mind. And then how do you build also a team in a studio around the infrastructure so you can build all that you want to make, which is like kind of a different thing on the technology side.
So I always have this question because there were traditional game makers, and then social gaming kind of just expanded the horizons. Now you had, like, my mom playing Farmville,
Mhm.
for example. Now it's a different cohort, it's a different mentality, they're different players. So it's, you said very rightly so, which is understanding. Game design is all about understanding human psychology,
Mhm.
and what works, what doesn't work. How much of a shift was it for you to go from, like, traditional hardcore game makers, and then suddenly this new cohort which was completely new to games?
Yeah, it was definitely a different mindset. Like when I look at hardcore games, there's an expectation of you understand how to use the control schema because you've learned it through other games. They're very complicated. People can definitely learn them, but that barrier to entry is quite high. Also, the mentality around like being good at something can be very daunting. I hear from a lot of people that aren't considered like core gamers. Like they're scared of the controller. They don't want to
Hmm.
ask somebody because there's a fear of judgment. Where I think a lot of the games now made today for a wider audience, you have to think about control schemas to be more forgiving, easy to remember, easy to recall. To me, it still goes back to like learning theory and taking away complexity, but still there's a lot of complexity under the hood for the player to play with, engage with. So taking like a lot of the games that we worked on, UX was really important in that delivery. And
Hmm.
so even though we had like game designers and engineers who came from AAA, we had to take that like thinking and reframe it for an audience that needed things to be more approachable. And so that made games more accessible to a lot of people. And it also made AAA more accessible too, which I love because now I feel like I'm
Hmm.
better at those games because they meet me halfway with settings. Um, so I think having been in children's games helped a lot because I had to think about a level of complexity that maybe adult wouldn't have. And
Hmm.
design things in a way that was just really approachable and think about how people walk through steps in gameplay and how do you like onboard and layer on complexity over time. Um, a lot of the games that what we made were actually quite complex at the end of the day, but we started our players with a small part of gameplay and then you kind of layered that on over time. So that was like really important to kind of scaffold players through those systems.
And so one thing I'm always curious about, right? So, like, I'm now talking like an engineer because I am one, which is, in engineering, we always have to keep up to date with new tech coming in. We're trying different languages, different frameworks, different piece of technology coming in. On the game design side, is it also a constant treadmill of just learning? Y'all are playing new games. People are always pushing the boundaries. So, do you play a lot of games to learn?
Yeah, I do play games. I There's times in my work I have to look at the competitive market. When we're doing
Yep.
something brand new, for me, it's I need to learn what the lexicon of our player base is and where they're starting from. So what's their background knowledge for like how they interact with certain menus? What's their background knowledge for like progression systems? What are they used to? And how do we do that meeting them halfway so we're not like reinventing a wheel that they have to learn? So I play games from that standpoint and also just try to look at like what's fun and why is it fun? And what systems and mechanics are driving that, and then what's the like logic and architecture that drives that, and how does that get repeated throughout a game. I feel games like Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom are really well designed. Their systems are so like they're nice, they're repeatable. It's just a really brilliant framework that is just fun, and I can kind of see some of the like psychology behind why I have to do certain things that they're solving for. They want me to explore the world, so there's Korok seeds everywhere, and that drives into their loop of expanding the inventory system, and it's very purposeful. And then it taps into that human psychology of discovery and exploration and completionism, but still solves this problem of like, how do we get players to explore the world just like because it's fun, but give them something to do and a goal that they can choose to do, but they don't have to do. But then it makes the game better because the inventory gets bigger.
I have a question that's purely based on my own personal distaste. What is the modern take? What is your take on Fatuis these days?
Oh gosh, they're needed. But how they're crafted and how they're presented to the player, I think, is different depending on the audience. So, and this is such an engineering thing to not like Fatuis.
I thought of it because you said Zelda, and are there Fatuis in Zelda?
No, but that also makes that game very unapproachable.
Oh, it makes it discoverable.
It makes it discoverable, but I had to have someone sit down with me and talk me through it to learn how to play a game at that complexity.
We're gonna have to meet halfway.
So people will find their own way to learn it, absolutely. But that game becomes more like, I hear it all the time from especially women my age who are trying to play with their kids. They want to play, let's say, Zelda and sit next to them, or they want to play maybe some other game, but they can't catch up with their kid who is discovering and learning on their own. They do need, like, a lot of people do need someone to kind of walk them through it. So I think they're missing a part that could be part of their audience that wants to be their audience. But the barrier of entry is quite high. It's an open world game. It's an RPG. Once you learn Zelda, you can learn other RPGs quite quickly. Someone like me, I always ask my husband, I'm like, can you just sit next to me and we'll talk about it? And then he's like, he makes fun of how I play. He's like, are you trying to break the game? Why are you exploring all these things? Go finish the mission. And I'm like, but I want to go look over here and I want to learn the story. But the psychology behind, like, I think players tangential to the audience who want to play, it's a different mindset and it's a different way of learning for sure. But I feel like as an engineer, you want to break and discover everything, and you want to use PC and Android devices because you can manipulate it to your will.
No.
I just want things to work out of the box.
I actually don't mind a good Fatui, although we have definitely built some in the past where even just testing the game, I was like, okay, I've spent 5 minutes in the Fatui, I'm out.
Yeah. I would say like Fatui and onboarding are also like, I think the way we're talking about it, it's very handholdy and structured. I don't think they need to be that obvious. I just think it needs to be intentional and helping the player discover those, like, where they need to go, where they need to be doesn't have to be as handholdy as maybe some games do make it. Yeah. So that goes back to like affordances and visual hierarchy and pointing to things that I might want to look at and leading me to it, and doing that through experiential design versus like a rote tutorial that is on rails, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm also guessing, like, I mean, analytics plays its part here, right? Like, we've always like added funnels to a FOTUE to just confirm, are things like too long? Are people dropping off at, stage 3 of the FOTUE, etc.? So all that also really impacts or should be part of your game, and you should be looking at.
Yeah, it really does affect retention 100%. Yeah.
Especially on mobile, when like the funnel keeps getting smaller after the download, it's something you should be tracking. Anyways, back to game design, which is what is like one of the most important aspects of game design, because see, at the end of the day, everyone's trying to chase like engagement and retention. Like, those are the two main metrics, how people will keep playing your game, keep liking your game, and stick around. What is the least common denominator? What is the most important aspect of game design in games?
That you have them.
I thought you were going to say Fatui after that.
No, you do need to have loops. Loops drive, right? They drive everything. They drive life. They drive economies. They drive systems and biology. there's systems and functions of consequence that are important to gameplay and game design. And not all people understand why they're important and are like, can you just make a fun game? Don't spend time with your pre-planning and your design phases. And it's like, well, you have to like know how all these systems interconnect and what's important and what to prioritize and what players are going to latch onto and what's that repeatable fun they're going to go through that drive your systems and decisions within those systems. That also helps with like understanding level of investment in different areas, what you can
Hmm.
augment, what you can create detractors for. Baseball is like an analogy I always use of it's its very core is with if you remove all other elements, it's you hit a ball and you like run around the bases and you score. That gets very boring very fast. So you start to add different elements to it that make it interesting. But all of those elements are feeding the function of I'm hitting the ball and I'm scoring a point. Um,
Hmm.
Part of that function is the team dynamic. So beyond that, you have your disruptors, which is the other team that's trying to get you out, and that's what makes it interesting. Are those disruptors? And we can talk about that mechanically. You can start deciding, or we talk about it in a loop. You can start deciding the mechanics that do that. And the mechanics of baseball can
Hmm.
change very fundamentally if you make the way you get out different or the mechanisms you use, right? It doesn't have to be a ball, it could be something else. And then you can create different games based off of that like system. And that's what gets really interesting.
Hmm.
So an interesting thought experiment. One thing which maybe some viewers might like here is there might be a few people here who are listening and they want to build a game, right? And they may either have skills, game design skill, or maybe just product skill, or maybe just engineering. So hypothetically speaking, let's say the three of us are like building a game. We're an indie house. We're building something. What's the right iteration process for you two? And this question goes to CJD as well, which is like we come up with a concept first, then we're like getting software out quickly to look and feel, or do you go, what kind of depth do you enter in game design before software goes in? So walk me through how we three would do this.
Yeah. I think even before that, I need to understand who's my audience and what's our
Hmm.
market position in the market. Even if it's like an indie game, if it's a triple A game, it doesn't matter. It's who is my market? What is the genre in the space that we're in? And what makes us interesting enough for players in this market to go to my game versus the other games that they're playing? So I start there. I definitely think of a feature list from that with the team. I understand with the engineers what's possible, what's the possibility space within the scope that we're working in, and what's our delivery timeline and our runway as well. Not a lot of
Yep.
designers think about that, but it's really important because it everything comes down to scope. Um, and then once we kind of have an idea of that framework and that vision, or we start to set that vision based off of the market fit and the audience, right? Creating pillars, creating the feature set, and how the gameplay happens in terms of loops and then deciding on mechanics. Um, then there's like different things that happen there with engineering. They're standing up the engine in the back end to deliver what the vision is at release and what the vision might be years from then. Be
Yep.
multiplayer later. You want to make that decision beforehand, even if you're not building it right away. I've been so many
Yep.
teams that make that really hard. You don't know what you don't know at the time. And then what else? Once we have an idea of those loops, those systems, and also the menus that we're building, just standing up the right pieces. Um, the first one is like, is this fun? Let's start with the core mechanic. So what are the few couple of things that's going to make this really fun that I do over and over again and prototype that. Um, and then start to decide on the mechanisms that we need to build for that. And then someone goes off and blows that out and makes it even more interesting and fun. And then starting to build those outer layers of your gameplay onion of your loops.
Hmm.
Okay, I always go back to farming, building a farming game. The loop that makes that fun, what is that? It's just farming. there's so many decisions you can make on that. So you want to prototype a lot of those different pieces. And then what are you augmenting to make that interesting systemically? And then eventually, what's this bigger story that you're telling, which is like kind of your meta loop and your glory? So I talk a lot about like the game onion. It's your core loop and gameplay that you repeat. Well, sorry, it's your core mechanic loop. I have so many debates about this. A lot of people in my past wrote what core loops were on the internet, and now everyone uses it. And I'm like, that is a PM loop. It's not a game loop. So it's your core mechanics, then your gameplay loop. Gameplay loop is basically your outcome and your goal. So your win and loss are what you're trying to achieve. And then there's layers on top of that that are augmenters to that loop. Then there's your meta layers. If you have social, there's a social layer. If it's social, all those layers are kind of feeding back into the core. And so when you're building kind of outward to layer these things on. And then depending on, and it always goes back to who am I pitching this to? Who's giving the funding? So sometimes I can get away with building a horizontal slice. Sometimes it's a vertical. It depends who the stakeholder is. Some people want to see something beautiful, so we do a vertical. I prefer horizontals being made at different levels of layers. So you can kind of see how it's all playing together, and then having different people or different like pods or strike teams working on their verticals to kind of expand and make it more interesting.
So, one of the hardest things there ever is, right? Which is, you mentioned fun, which is important while we're building this, even during the prototype phase. We're building something which is fun. How do you define fun? It's so hard to quantify that. So, for someone who's creating a prototype, because you have your own biases, you've come up with a feature, you probably think it's fun. How do you really test it out? Is it the entire studio is playing and you get a sense whether they're really enjoying it? How do you quantify that?
Yeah, definitely the entire studio is playing. I love dog fooding in that term, but it doesn't mean you're eating your dog's food. It means you're feeding dog food to your dog.
That's a Microsoft term, by the way, which I came to know.
I used to think it meant that like you're eating the food that you're giving to your dog. I don't know. How do you know your dog likes it if you don't? It's so dumb. I don't know why I thought that. Anyway, so trying your own product certainly is important. That gets dicey because your team is not your audience. Your team actually typically likes things really hard and are masochists as gamers. So you do start internally though, play it. You should see some fun happening, have your team rate your game, but eventually go through rounds of user testing. And so watch other players playing the game and give you feedback through feedback loops. And that has to be your core audience. And fun is like so many different things. Can I understand it? Can I adopt it? It's, do I want to come back to play this game? Can I see this in my life in perpetuity? Wow, that light is really intense. And the more like significant data you can get around that, the more you can kind of see the trend of like, this is going to go somewhere. People are having fun with this. For core mechanics, like people will tell you whether or not it's fun and if they want more. Oh, I like this, but I want more. So you keep adding more to it. When the game gets bigger and development starts to grow, it's right, seeing our players retaining, are they hitting their goals? Are they excited to come back? Fun can be painful. It can be hard. This game is hard, but I really want to keep playing it and I want to come back to it. It doesn't always mean laughing and joy, although joy can be expressed different ways.
That's so true. And I mean, I was just going to ask. I mean, it's probably a good time to ask now about how game designers work with different disciplines, right? Because you just mentioned you're kind of tracking how people are operating, working with your prototype. So you're clearly working a lot with data. So then there comes product input, there comes data analyst input. So while you're on this subject, which is the most difficult discipline to work with? I'm sure everyone has their quirks. As a game designer, you all are essentially, the captains of the ship, so to speak.
We all know the answer. It's engineers, especially engineers that think they can do game design.
Oh yeah.
No,
there's no shortage of that.
It's actually not engineers. I think people have to learn engineers and where they're coming from. I definitely recommend teams do disc assessments because it really shows people's perspectives and how to work with them. I think engineers taught me a lot on how to think and not be so in the clouds and be respectful to different disciplines. I think as designers, it's really easy to want to be the director of everything. Every designer that's like, I want to be a creative director. And I'm like, no, you don't. It's wild, let me tell you.
Yeah.
It's operations. But I would say, like, I don't, let's define difficult. I would say the hardest to understand from a design
Hmm.
discipline, I think, is the business. And business tends to get
Hmm.
encapsulated in product managers. And I see
Hmm.
a lot of tension between creative and business all the time. I think they're both very necessary, and I feel like I've built a lot of my career around finding that bridge for creative teams of like respecting that you do have to put food on the table for family members. And
Hmm.
um, as much as I want this to also be my hobby and create art, I do know that I have a responsibility to the people around me to keep them employed, um, like
Hmm.
first and foremost. And so that kind of, I think, gives people a perspective of like, we need to make sure that we are making decisions that we have to sell this game. The lens that we do it in is creative. It's also through brand marketing and understanding that vector. And so I think for a lot of creatives, it's really hard to understand that because there's often a like, I think there's like a misunderstanding between the two groups quite often. Yeah.
Hmm.
I personally have a
That
difficult
is
time
pretty.
working with CJD though. Like, just,
Yeah. Well, it's hard because I never got in your way, and I think you know, because I'm a terrible game designer, I just left that to the professionals.
yeah.
No, but what you said, Nana, makes sense. I think, like, and in fact, you're so spot on. I think the friction is actually healthy, right? Like, I think there has to be the friction between creative and business. But that's spot on. Uh, I guess I know you're still. I mean, we're all very young in this call, and so what I mean to ask though is like, if you could leave like one lasting impact, as a game designer, do you have that? Do you even think about that yet, or no? You're like, no, it's years down the line. I'm just having fun.
I think about this a lot lately because I am getting older. Um, for me, it's not about glory. It's not about like, yeah, I think about this a lot as I'm getting older. I think that can be very stressful to think about what impact I'm leaving. And for me, it's
Hmm.
about, am I delivering on my values as a person? No one can tell me that. It's my own personal thing. Whether or not I'm leaving an impact, I think will come on its own naturally. Um, and I just kind of have to stick to my principles and values and the work that I'm doing. I'm having a lot of fun, definitely, with as a game designer. Um, I do know, like, I have my job is to deliver something to the player at the end of the day, and to hold that staff and to be a servant, to people who are consuming this craft that we do. And it's not like, for me, what I get excited about is the craft itself, and then
Hmm.
also listening to understanding what players are looking for and kind of seeing the joy that it brings them. So I love that side of the impact. Not necessarily that my name is out there and like being famous is something that scares me. Um, and I think for a lot of like young designers, that's what they look for is that
Hmm.
notoriety. Notoriety terrifies me. But if I can impact in any way, it would be that like I made someone's life better at work. I made them love coming to work every day, be passionate. And then the stuff that we build together, our audience is really excited about it and they get to play it and that it impacts their life in that way.
That's really well said. Well, we're coming toward the end of our session here. I do want to ask you one question. What kind of advice would you have for game designers who want to become game designers? That's one. Second, we all know it's been a really really hard time in the gaming industry, especially for people graduating today. It's so hard getting in. So, could you speak about both angles here? Like, what is someone getting into design? What should they be thinking about? And then someone who's new, how do they get into the gaming industry?
Yeah, I would say like for game design, just always learn, look at look at what systems that we replicate in video games. Everything's a system that we look at, how the house works, how economics works, how people and psychology works. It's all a system at the end of the day. We're constantly having to learn about those systems to inspire our work. We're really rebuilding those wheels virtually all the time. Um, and don't be afraid to learn. I think people always ask, like, how did you get to where you are? And how can I do that? And where I see people start to glaze over is, hey, you do have to invest in yourself. It's not just going to be
Hmm.
the job training. They can, like, you're there to provide an output of work that's very specific. And yes, companies want you to grow. But if you want to grow faster than what the company is able to deliver to you within the hours that you have at work, you do have to invest in yourself outside of your job. That gets challenging as you get older. So when you're younger, make those investments and get used to that muscle of learning. Like I took boot camps that I did after work. I did online learning. I went to classes that were free that were available in the city. And I think without that, I couldn't be where I am today. Um, for young people breaking into the industry, it's really all about knocking on doors and finding that in and getting the experience. Part of it is learning the craft of game design from a professional standpoint, which is very different than when you're doing as a hobbyist. It's working on a team, it's
Mhm.
documentation, it's navigating and negotiating your ideas with other people. Also, not being married to your ideas because you're going to go through a lot of them and burn them very quickly until you get to
Yeah.
like something that works. And also aligning yourself to goals and goal sets. But you have to get your foot in the door. You have to learn what it's like to work with a group in an office and get those skills under your belt and then start to flex your design skills over time and keep learning.
Yeah, very important. I think
Mhm,
constant learning is the only way to go.
mhm.
Well, it's been fun catching up after ages, and really appreciate your time. All the best with the work that you're doing, and thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can we get some Sims swag or what? What's
Yeah,
happening here?
please.
I can order you some things for sure.
All right.
I'll,
Yay.
I'll have to ask for
All
your
right, on
advice.
that note,
Yeah.
I'm ending on a happy note then. Cheers.
Okay. Bye.